The U.S. Navy wanted to stop shark attacks on stranded sailors and pilots. As it turns out, the research uncovered something that might help you trigger more bass to strike. I'm always on the lookout for nuggets from science and research studies that help me understand bass better and hopefully catch a few more. And this one comes from a pretty unlikely place. At the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy was in a predicament. When sailors were lost at sea, when planes were going down and pilots ejected, they were out in that warm Pacific water and they attracted sharks really regularly. So they had to figure out what attracted sharks, and they did a number of research studies. Now, as it turned out, it was pretty consistent what attracted them, and when other scientists studied it, it also attracted a lot of other predator fish as well. This groundbreaking research in the 60s and 70s helped save pilots and sailors, and it still holds up today. Once we go through the research findings, I think you'll see some clear takeaways on what lures work well for bass, what are going to attract them, and how to work them to catch more bass. So like I said, by the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy had a real problem, and specifically in the Pacific, fighting Japan. They had a number of planes go down and also ships go down, and when those sailors and pilots were stranded at sea, the sharks were showing up really quickly and often attacking. Now, the most famous example of this, or infamous, is the USS Indianapolis. Right at the end of World War II, just weeks before the war ended, it was torpedoed and went down. The sailors had to get off the ship, and the sharks, boy, they came in. And they attacked and ate as many as dozens, up to possibly 150 sailors. In reviewing this disaster, experts agree this is probably one of the worst shark attacks in history. They were most likely white-tip sharks and tiger sharks possibly. One of the survivors said on the BBC, every now and then, like lightning, a shark would come straight up and take a sailor and take him straight down. One came up and took the sailor next to me. It was just somebody screaming, yelling, or getting bit. And that was Dean Cox in 2013 talking to the BBC. Basically, by the end of the war, there were tons of gruesome stories. They relayed one in a Smithsonian article about a pilot and his co-pilot was eaten alive right next to him while they were hanging on for dear life. I mean, just some gruesome stuff. And then here was the odd part, that it wasn't just stranded sailors and pilots, that when they went to pick these people up, that the helicopters themselves seemed to draw the sharks into the area and draw more attacks. So in 1944, near the end of World War II, the Navy did a survey of their sailors, and before this time, sharks were not something that sailors were afraid of. It was their boat getting torpedoed, being shot down, being shot in war, you name it. By the end of the war, shark attacks and fear of that was near the top of the list. So they had a real morale problem, and they had to address it pretty quickly. So the first solution, they tried some chemicals, they tried shark repellents. There was some testing that should repel sharks, but it didn't really seem like it was working in the field, and service members were still not happy and still freaked out by sharks. So in 1958, the Naval's Office of Naval Research commissioned studies to actually study and figure out what drew sharks in and what could deter them. So in the 1960s and early 70s, there were actually a number of studies done. There are three prominent ones here that are cited frequently and have some of the most pertinent information for bass fishermen. I'm going to go through one in 1963 and a follow-up in 1972, both of those done by the University of Miami. And then there was another study in 1969, and that was done at California State College in Long Beach. So let's dive into these studies, and I think you're going to see pretty quickly why these apply to bass fishermen. Let's start with the 1963 one, and basically what they wanted to do was, starting out, let's record the sounds that sharks are drawn to. Now, they noted that sharks, if there's blood in the water, that's a famous phrase, and everybody knows about that, but sound travels very quickly underwater, faster than above water. So these sharks are being drawn in from long distances and very quickly, so it wasn't blood in the water. So what they came into were struggling fish. So what they did is got some 26-pound black grouper, and basically they put it on a spear and made that thing struggle, and then recorded underwater the sounds of this struggling grouper. So once they had this recording of the underwater struggling grouper, they took the sound and they analyzed it by the frequency. And what they found were low frequencies were what were predominant. Those were the majority of them, and also the very lowest, under 100 hertz, that's what was the loudest. So what they did is they tried to make synthetic sounds, and basically they did it at low frequencies and high frequencies and wanted to test which ones did the sharks respond to. So over 9 days, they did 77 observation periods. And starting off with the high frequency, which they pulsed, which means it wasn't just continuous, but they would turn it on, off really quickly. that high frequency, that was very ineffective. Did not draw in sharks. For 15 periods, basically they only drew in 2 sharks. So the next thing they tried were low frequencies and tried those continuously. So it's just that continuous sound. In 12 periods, guess how many sharks they see? 0. Did not see a single one with that continuous sound. Now, the last category they tried were low frequencies, but they pulsed it. So that means the sound goes on, off, on, off, on, off. And out of 22 observation periods, they saw 18 shark. So what they quickly saw after this first study was low frequency that was pulsed really drew sharks in. When it was a continuous sound or it was high frequency sound, really didn't draw them in. Low and pulsed drew them in. So study number 2 comes along now, and what they wanted to do is they said, okay, low frequency works when it's pulsed, but how fast do you pulse it? Or do you just do it regularly where it's not regular? So what they did were very low frequency waves at 25 to 50 hertz, and then they pulsed it at different rates, so starting at 1 pulse per second, and 5 and 10 and 20 pulses per second, and then they irregularly did it as well, so it was more random. So the very first part of this study, what they did is tested high frequency down to low frequency, and they did mid-range ones as well. And basically they started off at high frequency ones from 500 to 1,000 hertz, and then they went to 250 to 500, 75 to 150, and then the lowest was 25 to 50 hertz. And basically what they saw was the lower the frequency went, the sightings of the sharks went up. Basically lower, again, better than high frequency. And just to put it in perspective, when they were making no sound, they saw a total of 12 sharks. When they were making sounds, they saw 74, so they saw dramatically more. And the next step that they went to is said, okay, this lowest frequency, the 25 to 50 hertz, that's where we see the most. So let's test it when we change the pulsing from 1 per second up to 20 per second, and then also do it irregularly, and let's see how many sharks we draw in now. Now, when they only use this low frequency, they saw a big difference. When the sound was on, they spotted 115 sharks. When it was off, they only saw 34 sharks. So what they saw here is when they increased the rate of pulsing per second, going from 1 to 5 to 10 to 20 per second, the higher they went to, the more sharks they saw, the higher the pulsing was. But none of those could touch the irregular one, where they didn't have a regular rhythmic cadence, whereas real irregular, that actually saw the most amounts of sharks. So more pulsing per second at a low frequency got better, but irregular was the best. And they did mention with these sharks that a lot of them made a beeline. I mean, they came directly to the sound, and 2 of them actually even tried to eat the speaker, grabbed a hold of it. But they weren't just kind of wandering around and then finding it. They were hearing the sound and going directly to it. And then they did a third part to this study where they wanted to see, can we draw these sharks away from one place to another? So they actually put 2 ships in the water, and they would use the speaker and turn it on at the one when the sharks were already attracted around the other ship. And yes, indeed, they could pull these fish over there. And then the other thing they would do, they would start playing it from one vessel. The sharks would start moving over there, and then they would stop it at this vessel and turn it back on at the other one. Those sharks would turn around. Some of them made a straight beeline. Other of them kind of meandered, but they literally could draw the sharks from one boat to the next just by turning on that speaker. So they could pull them away and move them away from one if they turned on that speaker. Now, the researchers in this already started to figure out why the helicopters, the rescue helicopters, were drawing sharks in. They said a lot of these models had rotors that were spinning and pulsing basically at 11 pulses per second with a low frequency, that helicopter being up there. And that was basically putting out that calling in pulse right there, drawing sharks to the area. The helicopter coming to rescue was actually drawing the sharks in with that low pulsing sound. So if you're much of a bass fisherman at all, you probably already can see where this is heading and how you can draw a fish. But this next study, they actually wanted to take it from the open blue water up to the reefs and see if this applied to other species as well, because they had noted in some of these studies that grouper and snapper were actually coming into these sounds as well. Now, this third study shows a few things. One, because groupers are more similar to bass. Sharks, their hearing and lateral line is pretty similar to bass, but then bass have a swim bladder as well. They're part of a teleost family of fish, and basically the grouper and snapper are more similar there. And what you see from the grouper is they do the same thing. They were drawn in. They didn't come in running all the way up to it like the sharks did, the shark coming straight into the speaker and then looking around and trying to hammer something. The grouper were a little more tentative, but basically it drew them up to the point where they got in visual range of the speaker, and then they could look around. Some came all the way up to it, some stopped where they could first see it, but it drew them to a point where they could actually see the speaker. Now, whereas some of these other types of species of sharks, they were coming all the way in, and they could just, like I said, you could pull them from one boat to the other, just dupe them, and they would just kept on coming day after day. On this test, they tested silky sharks in a little bit different type of setting, and these fish that they noted in the first 15 minutes of making that low frequency sound, even when you pulsated it, they were suckers for it. They came in right away. But after the first 15 minutes, the number that would come in dropped off. And by the 6th day of the study, guess how many came in then? None. Nothing were coming in. So these fish started to figure it out. It was the same old, same old. They came to investigate at the beginning, but by the end of it, they said, I know that sound. I'm not going over there. So researchers noted in all these studies and other ones that not just sharks, but as you saw there, grouper, some snapper, other species were coming to this as well. And let me put up a little chart here that I think helps explain why sharks and bass aren't that much different, and then grouper and bass are pretty similar. So bass and grouper are both in a category called teleost. They're a type of fish that they have that lateral line, they have an inner ear. Both the sharks and the bass and the grouper, they all have that. But then bass also have swim bladders, and they're set up a little bit different with their hearing and the frequency ranges. So let's dive into that a second. So if we dive into the lateral line, that's the one that seems so mysterious and stuff. And basically running down the side of the fish and then also around their head, bass can actually sense pressure waves. At close range, they can actually sense. It's like a distant touch is what they call it, where you don't have to, you get the sensation of touch, but you're not touching it. Something a few feet away is pushing water. I sense that it's there. The frequencies that sharks hear that's like, it's very low, 25 to 50 hertz. Bass, you're looking at 1 to 80, so even lower and somewhat higher. And there's estimates up to 200 hertz where they can hear that. And then the grouper are very similar. So both of them, the sharks and the bass, plus the grouper, they're very similar to the bass, but the sharks and the bass, they have that similar lateral line. Now, bass and sharks have ears as well. They don't have big floppy ones like my giant ones, but they actually have inner ears that are built in, and they can hear with that as well. The range of the sharks is a little bit lower than the bass. They can hear 20 to 800 hertz. So it's a little bit lower they can hear with their ear versus their lateral line, but the bass hears pretty low sounds as well, 100 hertz, and then once it gets up to about 1,000, it starts to drop off, but they can hear up to somewhere like 3,000-4,000 hertz there, so pretty high, and then the grouper are pretty similar. All right, so enough of the science lesson. Let's dive into baits and how you work them, and how is that going to catch more bass for you. So remember, this research started with that struggling prey fish. That's what drew the shark in. That was the frequency. That's what drew in the shark. It drew in the grouper, and it stands to reason that since the bass has similar hearing, plus they're a predator fish, they're coming after prey fish, especially when they're struggling, probably those low frequency sounds hold up as well. So it's easy to see that basically in a regular low frequency lure, pulsating is good pretty quickly, but if it's irregular, that's the type of lure we want to pick. So we're going to go through lure by lure here in a minute and see what's irregular and low frequency and stuff. But irregular, to me, that means one of two things. Either you stop and go a bait, you just pause it a second, give it a snap or something, or something kicks out, like bladed jigs want to kick out, a crankbait that hunts that all of a sudden is going rhythmically and then kicks out to the side, or you just snap your rod tip with like a jerkbait or something like that. Irregularity, either stop and go, changing the way you're working it, or a bait that naturally is irregular. Obviously, that's how you get irregular low frequency sound. Now, the other thing is, remember, the faster the pulsating at low frequencies, the better they responded as well. So obviously, if you reel a crankbait or a spinnerbait faster, that's going to increase the frequency that it's pulsating. But also keep this in mind, and this isn't very well known, but basically the frequency, the dominant frequency of your bait, the faster you work it, that frequency actually moves higher and higher. So if you super slow roll your bait, the predominant frequency is going to be lower than if you're working it quickly. Remember, low frequency is good, but they also want irregular. So there again, stop and go plus reel a little faster and a little slower, you're not only changing when it's going on and off and when it's silent, but you're also changing the frequency signature of it when you're speeding it up and slowing it down. It changes that frequency a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So it seems to tell me right there what you want to do is mix in irregular retrieves, do stop and go, but also change that speed a little bit. All right, well, that's all good in theory, but let's talk about what we really like, right? Baits, and an excuse to go buy a few more lures. And what's the biggest low frequency bait that, if you're old like me, what's the one that we always grew up throwing in muddy water at night, dark water and stuff? A thumper spinnerbait. And that means a Colorado blade, especially a single blade, and that thumper blade. I mean, you can feel that thing thump when you're doing it. It's putting out a low frequency. That's kind of the old school original thumper that everybody went to when it's stained water. When it's cold water, you want a big thump. So the spinnerbait used to be the king, but the king of thump and vibration now and pulsating, when I think of pulsating, it's a bladed jig. These things, the blade knocks on the head, and it's doing it several times per second. When you reel it fast, I mean, that thing's, you can hear it even above the water. It's knocking that head, it's going back and forth, it's hitting hard, it's making low frequency vibration at a very high rate, and it's very loud and noticeable. They're regular, you can make it kick out where it all of a sudden changes. You can do stop and go, you can speed it up, slow it down, so you can make a lot of irregularity with it. And the thing about these, this whole theory about sharks, the first time I ever heard this, and actually the only time I ever heard it, was from actually Dr. Keith Jones, who is a fish researcher. He worked for Berkley for years in their lab, with the original Berkley power worm and stuff going back to the 80s. He's long ago retired, but he's the person that I mentioned this shark research. That's what originally tipped me off to it. And he's the one that said, well, obviously the low frequencies probably applies to bass as well. The slobber knocker, this is actually Berkley's one, they tried to maximize the low frequency on this. So this thing is a lateral line thumping machine. You can feel it. But any of these bladed jigs, to me, when you're talking pulsating, irregularity, low frequency, man, I think of chatterbaits and bladed jigs like the slobber knocker. The fact that these things make so much noise and are so obnoxious and the fish haven't gotten conditioned to them, that these win so many tournaments, I think this is a testament to that low frequency shark attraction right here. Now, there's probably a lot of other baits that are coming to mind too, like crankbaits, right? But I bet you the one that you're not thinking about, what about topwaters? And some of the most outlandish designs that have worked for years, think of buzz baits, the Choppo, any of these plopper baits that goes around and just plops and churns the surface, the old twin prop baits, those things, devil's horses and stuff, those froth up the water. That's actually putting out, that's like that helicopter up there above the surface making that low thumping sound. But as this gurgling the water and breaking up the water, that's putting loud, low frequency waves and pulsating ones. If you're doing a topwater and you're twitching it or stop and go, speeding it up, slowing down, topwaters, that's probably part of the reason why Choppos and buzzbaits and stuff will work so long and catch so many big fish. These are the kings of going fast, covering water, drawing in active fish, and getting them to bite. Now, some of the original noisemakers and most legendary ones are lipless crankbaits. The thing about these, when you hear them, they're actually predominantly high frequency. So that's the stuff that didn't really draw fish in. Now, most of these today will have lower rattles in them as well. And it's a really tight wobble. And here right there, it's tight, so it's pulsating very quickly. They make a lot of that high frequency though. You hear that. So that's not what I think of when I think of low frequency outside of the one knockers and stuff that have more of a thunk to them. But lipless crankbaits, no. And then the round, traditional, this is a Berkley dime here, the more rounded, the style of these is more of a roll. So the pulsating, you think of the pulsating per second, this is like 1 or 2. It's more of slow, lazy rolling. And this is what we throw a lot of times in the summertime. They will catch fish year round, but this has a single, you hear that single knocker in there. So even though it's rolling and kind of going slowly, that single knocker, instead of all those rattles, that thunk, 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 1 time per second, 5 times per second, something like that, it's pulsating and it's also low frequency, giving you that little bit of shake right there with it. But they don't roll as much, or they don't pulsate as much. Now, this is a flat-sided crankbait, and these balsa ones, and this is a Berkley Frittside, and any of these flat-sided baits, the Shad Rap's a classic one. There's all sorts of ones like that. legendary fish catchers. These are legendary in pressured waters and especially in clear water and when it's cold. Now these flat-sided ones, they have a lot tighter wiggle, and we've always thought, well, that's more finesse, right? It's just that narrow little wiggle. The other one's more aggressive and it's wide wobbling. Well, that's slower. That's less. You remember, the higher the pulsating rate, the better it is. These go really fast. This one, it's called the Clickin Frittside. Any of these that have single or just a few rattles in there instead of a bunch, it's going to be a lower frequency. When this thing's really fast, really tightly wobbling going down there, it's pulsating at a higher rate than these rounder crankbaits are going through the water. That's what's going to give you that higher pulsating. That's probably part of the reason why these tighter crankbaits, why they seem to excel and why they tend to catch more fish, whereas the rounder rolling ones still work sometimes, but so many guys, when it's pressured situations, those tighter wobbling ones with that higher pulsating rate seem to do a lot better. And then one last thing, this is back to a topwater, but you think about what was a big bait trend maybe 10 years ago that really took the fishing world by storm. Instead of rattling baits that had all those BBs and shot in there, they went to the one knocker and the single, just a single one or two big ball bearings or lead weights in there, and you hear like a big, let me get the hooks here, but it's a thud, ka-thud, ka-thud. And this is a walking bait here. This one, this jaywalker, you can take this and fish it on the top, and when you're walking the dog back and forth, instead of just that quiet action there, it's like thunk, 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 thunk. So it's 1 or 2 times per second, you're getting that low frequency thunk that is helping call those fish in. Those one knockers, when they first came out, lipless crankbaits, topwaters, everything, man, that seemed to be the deal. And it still works a lot of times, just that thunk, thunk, thunk. Whether it's a topwater like this, it's a lipless, in your crankbaits where you have the single clicker, or the square bills, any of the flat-sided stuff, that one knocker, that single rattle, a lot of times seems like that's more effective than having a whole bunch of those high frequency ones. And this is probably why. So at this point, if you bass fish just a little bit, you're probably thinking, man, I'm just going to throw the loudest low frequency things I can, all these moving baits, all these loud thunking ones, I'm just going to hammer bass. If you fish very much, you say, yeah, those things are great some days, but a lot of times I won't chase them and they just stop eating them and I have to go to worm and all that. Well, I think those silky sharks kind of show the fact they get conditioned and stuff. Yeah, these call in active fish, but the ones that don't have a whole lot of that rhythmic vibration, that have more subtle swimming and are still putting out some vibration and frequencies on that low end, maybe just the jig head hitting the bottom, crawling up over a limb or something like that, hitting a rocky bottom. If you have a shaky head, if you have a Nico rig with a little weight on the back when it hits, or just these little subtle boot tails when it's swimming through, it's putting out pressure waves and some low frequency like a natural swimming fish, but it's not loud and obnoxious. Obviously, they could get conditioned to a lot of sounds, they turn off, and then other times, they're aggressive and they want that. My rule of thumb is basically if they're aggressive, if they're feeding, if it's unpressured water, if it's a time when it's a bite window, I want to go with something loud and obnoxious, try to call them in, cover a lot of water, make long casts, that loud sound. Those fish, if he's aggressive or she, they're going to run it down and find it. I'm going to turn the trolling motor up high. If I'm bank fishing, I'm not going to stand in one spot. I'm going to walk around the whole pond and keep on casting and casting. Cover water with that, it's going to draw him in, and that aggressive fish, he's going to come in. Bass, once they get up close, they're not going to bite because of the sound, they're going to bite because it's visual, and then they're going to decide, yeah, I like it or they don't, and they're probably done one way or another. But you get one crack at that fish and keep on moving water, getting in front of as many as possible. When it's tougher, that's where a new sound, like I said, switching to that one knocker, something they haven't heard before, go into silent versions of crankbaits where there's no rattles in them, where you go to a different, there's brass and there's glass ones and tungsten, all sorts of different ones. Or like the bladed jigs work so good lots of times, but then when they stop biting, the subtle cousin of it, the swim jig, will tend to work more. So that's where all of a sudden it's just a different sound. So your next question is probably, he has rattling baits that are orange, he has white and orange ones that don't rattle, he has ones with no rattles that are purple and blue and stuff. What color do I pick? Check out my color videos and check out the rest of my science study playlist. Help you break down what color to use and what the science says about catching more fish.